The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a deep grinding sound that made every delegate in the room freeze. Heavy footsteps echoed across the polished floor as Warlord Thexkar entered, his towering form casting long shadows under the bright lights. Behind him slithered something that made even the bravest warriors in the room take a step back. The battle serpent was a nightmare made real. 30 feet of pure killing machine, its body thick as a transport tube and covered in crystalline scales that shifted from deep purple to burning orange. Each scale was sharp enough to cut through steel and laced with toxins that could drop a Goranian war beast in seconds. The creature's head swayed back and forth, studying the room with 6 glowing eyes that seemed to see right through armor and flesh to the fear beneath. Thexkar himself was almost as frightening as his pet, 8 feet tall with skin like black metal and arms that ended in claws instead of hands. He represented everything the Galactic Council had learned to fear about the Vorthak Empire. His species had conquered 17 worlds in the past decade, and they had done it the same way every time. Challenge the local leaders to ritual combat, crush them with the battle serpent, then demand surrender. Council members, Thexkar's voice boomed across the chamber, each word dripping with contempt. I come before you today with a simple offer. Give me control of the Kepler, Vega, and Centauri systems, and I will leave your pathetic alliance in peace. Refuse and face my champion in the ancient way. The battle serpent raised its massive head and let out a sound that was part roar, part hiss, and completely terrifying. The creature's neural disruptors began to glow, sending crackling energy across its scales. Several delegates actually fell from their seats. Ambassador Kethval of the Zephyrian Federation was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Warlord Thexkar, surely we can discuss this like civilized beings? There must be some other way to resolve our differences. Thexkar laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Civilized? You call hiding behind walls and treaties civilized? The strong take what they want and the weak serve or die? That is the natural order. My battle serpent has defeated the champions of 17 worlds. Your greatest warriors are nothing compared to this perfect killing machine. The serpent moved closer to the viewing area, and delegates scrambled over each other to get away. Its breath came out in visible clouds of toxic gas that made the air shimmer with deadly heat. The creature's tail, which ended in a cluster of bone spikes each as long as a sword, scraped against the floor and left deep gouges in the reinforced metal. The combat will take place in 3 standard hours. Thexkar continued. Present your champion or prepare to kneel before the Vorthak Empire. The choice is yours, but choose quickly. My pet grows hungry, and I would hate for it to start snacking on random delegates. As if to prove his point, the battle serpent's forked tongue flicked out toward a group of Altarian diplomats. They fell over themselves trying to get away, and one actually fainted from the toxic fumes that rolled off the creature's scales. After Thexkar and his monster left the chamber, the delegates sat in stunned silence. Finally, Admiral Korex of the Draknari Military Command stood up, his normally proud bearing slumped with defeat. We all know how this ends, he said grimly. I have seen the recordings from the other worlds. The battle serpent is not just strong and fast, it is smart. It learns from each attack and adapts. Its scales can deflect our strongest energy weapons, and its toxins work on every known species. Even if we could hurt it, one bite from those fangs would kill any of our champions in seconds. Other voices joined in, each one more hopeless than the last. The Crystalline Collective spoke of how their strongest warrior had lasted only minutes against the serpent. The Hive Queens mentioned that even their largest soldiers had been torn apart like paper. Species after species shared stories of defeat and conquest. Ambassador Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation sat quietly in her seat, listening to the growing panic around her. Humans were still new to the Galactic Council, having joined only 5 years ago. Most of the other species still saw them as primitive creatures from a backwater world, barely worth including in galactic politics. Sarah was not a large woman by human standards, standing just over 5.5 feet tall with brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She wore the standard diplomatic uniform of dark blue, with the Earth symbol on her shoulder. Nothing about her seemed particularly impressive, especially compared to the towering aliens around her, but something in her calm expression caught the attention of Admiral Korex. Ambassador Chen, he said desperately, your species has a reputation for unusual solutions to impossible problems. Surely you have some idea how to face this creature. All eyes turned to Sarah, and she could see the hope and fear mixed together in their alien faces. Some looked at her like she might perform a miracle. Others seemed to think she was their only option left, no matter how slim the chance of success. Sarah stood up slowly and cleared her throat. "I volunteer to represent the Council in ritual combat against the Vorthak champion." The chamber erupted in shocked voices. Some delegates tried to talk her out of it, saying it was suicide. Others seemed relieved that someone else was willing to die in their place. A few actually laughed, thinking the small human woman had lost her mind. Ambassador Chen, Admiral Korek said carefully, "I appreciate your courage, but you must understand what you are facing. This creature has killed the greatest warriors in the galaxy. What possible chance do you have?" Sarah smiled, and something in that expression made the laughter die away. "Admiral, my species has a saying. It is not the size of the dog in the fight that matters, but the size of the fight in the dog. I request a brief recess to collect my equipment from my ship." "Equipment?" asked Ambassador Kethaval. "What kind of equipment could possibly help against that monster?" "The kind that has kept my species alive for millions of years," Sarah replied. "I will return in 2 hours. Please inform Warlord Thexkar that the Council accepts his challenge." As Sarah walked toward the exit, the other delegates watched her go with mixed feelings. Some admired her bravery. Others thought she was walking to her death. But all of them wondered the same thing. What could a human possibly bring that would make any difference against the battle serpent? The chamber doors closed behind her, leaving the delegates to wait and worry. Outside, Sarah made her way to the docking bay where the human ship waited. She had calls to make and preparations to complete. The Galactic Council was about to learn something important about humanity and the creatures they chose to call friends. In 3 hours, everything would change. The galaxy just did not know it yet. Sarah walked through the corridors of the space station with steady steps, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed her. Word had already spread about the human who had volunteered to face the battle serpent. Some aliens looked at her with pity, others with curiosity, but most just seemed confused about why anyone would choose certain death. The human ship, New Horizon, sat in Docking Bay 7, a modest vessel compared to the massive warships and luxury cruisers that filled the station. Sarah pressed her palm to the scanner and smiled as the familiar hum of human technology welcomed her home. "Tank, I'm back," she called out as she stepped inside. The response came not as words but as a deep rumbling sound from the ship's main cabin. Sarah followed the sound and found her companion exactly where she had left him, sprawled across a specially reinforced couch that had cost more than most people's cars. Tank raised his massive head and looked at her with intelligent brown eyes. He was not quite like anything else in the known galaxy, and that was exactly the point. 3 feet tall at the shoulder and nearly 5 feet long, he had the stocky build of a creature designed for violence. His fur was thick and coarse, colored in patterns of black, white, and brown that helped him blend into almost any environment. But it was his face that truly showed what he was. The broad skull and powerful jaw belonged to a predator, while his small rounded ears and bright eyes held an intelligence that most aliens found disturbing. Tank was the result of centuries of human genetic engineering, combining the legendary toughness of Earth's honey badger with the size and pack instincts of a Wolverine. "We have work to do." "Boy," Sarah said, scratching behind his ears. Tank made a pleased rumbling sound and rolled onto his back, showing the reinforced harness that covered his chest and back. The harness was not for show. It contained impact dampeners, medical sensors, and emergency supplies that had saved both their lives more than once. Sarah and Tank had been partners for 7 years, ever since she had graduated from the diplomatic corps and been assigned to first contact missions. While other diplomats brought translators and bodyguards, Sarah had brought Tank. It had seemed like an odd choice at the time, but it had worked better than anyone expected. Tank was not just a pet or even a working animal in the way most aliens understood such things. He was a partner in every sense of the word. He had been genetically designed, not just for physical abilities, but for emotional intelligence and the capacity for deep bonding that had made the relationship between humans and their animal companions legendary throughout Earth's history. "The Galactic Council is about to learn something interesting about us," Sarah told him as she checked his harness and made sure all the systems were working properly. "There is this Vorthak warlord with a battle serpent that has been conquering worlds. Big, scary thing with toxins and energy weapons and crystalline armor. Tank's ears perked up at the word Serpent, and his lips pulled back to show teeth that could bite through titanium. Sarah laughed and rubbed his broad head. I thought you might be interested. The thing is 30 feet long and weighs about as much as a small shuttle. It has killed every champion sent against it, and now it wants to add the Galactic Council to its list of victories. She pulled up a holographic display showing the battle serpent in action. Tank watched carefully as the creature moved, his head tilting from side to side as he studied its gait and attack patterns. Sarah had seen him do this before when they encountered dangerous wildlife on unexplored planets. Tank was learning, preparing, planning. The aliens think we are crazy for accepting this challenge, Sarah continued. They see you and think you are just a small animal that cannot possibly stand against their nightmare monster. They do not understand what you really are. What Tank really was could not be explained easily to species that had never experienced the bond between humans and their companion animals. Other races had pets, working animals, even trained predators like the battle serpent. But those relationships were based on dominance and control. The human approach was completely different. Humans had spent thousands of years learning to work with creatures that could easily kill them. They had turned wolves into dogs, wildcats into house pets, and predatory birds into hunting partners. The secret was not domination but cooperation, not fear but trust, not ownership but partnership. Tank had been bred from animals that epitomized this philosophy. Honey badgers were famous throughout the galaxy as creatures that simply refused to give up. No matter how big or dangerous their opponent, they would fight animals 10 times their size and often win through sheer determination and tactical intelligence. Wolverines brought size and strength to the mix, along with pack instincts that made them incredibly loyal to their chosen family. The combination had produced something unique, a creature with the physical abilities to take on almost any opponent, and the emotional intelligence to work as part of a team. Tank could hunt alone if needed, but he was at his best when working with Sarah. They thought together, planned together, fought together. Sarah finished her equipment check and sealed Tank's harness. Ready to show the galaxy what Earth animals can do? Tank stood up and stretched, his claws extending to leave scratches in the reinforced decking. He was not a large creature by galactic standards, but there was something about the way he moved that spoke of contained violence. Every step was balanced and controlled, every movement precise and purposeful. They made their way back through the station corridors, and Sarah noticed that the reactions from other aliens had changed. Word about Tank had spread, and now the looks they received were not just confused but worried. Several species that prided themselves on their predatory heritage gave Tank a wide berth as they passed. In the main diplomatic area, they encountered a group of Draknari military officers who stopped to stare. Draknari were 7-foot-tall reptilians with natural armor and razor-sharp claws, apex predators on their homeworld, but as Tank walked past them, their body language changed. They stood straighter, their head crests flattened against their skulls in a display Sarah recognized as submission behavior. Tank ignored them completely, but Sarah saw him register their reaction with the slight tilt of his ears that meant he was filing information away for later use. He had that effect on a lot of species. Something about him triggered deep genetic memories of what it meant to be prey. They reached the main observation deck where other delegates had gathered to wait for the combat. Sarah found a quiet corner where Tank could rest and watch the crowd. Several aliens approached to ask questions about her animal, but Tank's steady stare and low warning growls kept most of them at a respectful distance. Ambassador. Kethaval finally worked up the courage to come closer. Ambassador Chen, I must ask. What exactly is that creature? Our biological scanners cannot get a clear reading on its genetic structure. Sarah smiled and ran her hand along Tank's back. This is Tank. He is what happens when humans decide to improve on perfection. His ancestors were the toughest animals on our planet, and we helped them become even tougher. But surely you do not expect him to defeat the battle serpent in direct combat. The size difference alone. Size is not everything, Sarah replied. Tank and I have been partners for 7 years. We have faced creatures that most diplomats only see in nightmares. The thing about Earth animals is that they do not fight fair. They fight to win. Tank looked up at her and made a soft rumbling sound that she recognized as agreement. The Galactic Council was about to learn a very important lesson about the difference between a weapon and a partner, between a pet and a predator, between the civilized way of fighting and the way things were done on a world where only the smartest and most cooperative survived. The cargo bay had been cleared of everything except the most basic safety barriers. What remained was a space large enough to hold 3 shuttlecraft, with walls of reinforced steel and a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. Emergency lights cast harsh shadows across the floor, creating an arena that looked more like a prison than a place of honor. Sarah stood at one entrance, Tank sitting calmly beside her. At the opposite end, Warlord Thek's car waited with his battle serpent. The creature had grown even more menacing in the artificial lighting, its crystalline scales reflecting the harsh beams in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The viewing area above the arena was packed with delegates from every member species of the Galactic Council. Some had recording devices ready to document what they expected to be a very short and brutal fight. Others seemed to be taking bets on how long the human and her companion would last. Admiral Korek stood at the center of the viewing platform, his voice carrying clearly through the bay's communication system. By the ancient laws of ritual combat, this challenge will be decided by single battle between chosen champions. The rules are simple. The fight continues until one champion yields or cannot continue. Are both parties ready? Warlord Thekskar raised one clawed hand. The Vorthak Empire is ready. My battle serpent hungers for victory. The serpent lifted its massive head and opened its mouth, revealing fangs as long as daggers dripping with venom that hissed when it hit the floor. Its neural disruptors began to glow with building energy, and the air around it shimmered with heat and toxic gases. Sarah looked down at Tank, who was studying their opponent with the same calm attention he gave to everything that might try to kill them. His tail had stopped moving and his ears were forward and alert. She could see the muscles under his fur shifting as he prepared for action. Ready, Sarah called out. Admiral Korex activated the arena barriers, sealing the combatants inside the fighting space. Let the trial begin. The battle serpent moved first, crossing the arena floor with shocking speed for something so large. Its body flowed like liquid metal, scales clicking against the deck plating as it closed the distance to its opponents in seconds. Tank did not run. Instead, he moved to meet the attack, but not in any way the serpent expected. Rather than charging straight ahead like every other champion had done, Tank angled to one side at the last moment, using his low profile to slip under the serpent's striking range. The serpent's head snapped down where Tank had been, but found only empty air. Its neural disruptors fired, sending crackling energy across the deck. But Tank was already somewhere else, moving with the kind of fluid grace that came from millions of years of evolution as both predator and prey. From the viewing area came surprised murmurs. This was not how the previous battles had gone. Usually the serpent's first strike ended the fight immediately, with the challenger either dead from venom or paralyzed by neural disruption. The serpent coiled and struck again, this time trying to use its massive tail to sweep Tank off his feet. But Tank leaped at exactly the right moment, using the tail as a springboard to launch himself toward the creature's neck. What happened next made every delegate in the viewing area gasp in shock. Tank's jaws clamped down on the serpent's throat, just behind the head where the scales were smallest. His teeth, designed to bite through the toughest materials on Earth, found gaps in the crystalline armor that energy weapons could not penetrate. The serpent thrashed wildly, trying to shake off its attacker, but Tank held on with the grip that had made his ancestors legendary. Honey badgers were famous for one thing above all others. Once they got hold of something, they never let go. The serpent's toxic breath washed over Tank, but the reinforced harness Sarah had given him filtered out the worst of the poisons. His genetic modifications included resistance to most known toxins, a trait borrowed from the creatures that had survived Earth's most dangerous environments. Desperate now, the serpent tried to slam Tank against the arena walls, but Tank used his claws to climb higher on the creature's neck, staying in the one spot where the serpent could not reach him. Every few seconds his jaws would tighten, finding new weak points in the armor. Impossible, breathed one of the delegates. The battle serpent's scales are supposed to be impenetrable. Sarah watched from her position near the arena wall, making no move to interfere. This was Tank's fight now, and she trusted him to handle it. She had seen him take down creatures twice his size before, using the same tactics that had kept Earth's small predators alive in a world full of giants. The serpent began to slow its thrashing, and its neural disruptors flickered and dimmed. Tank was not just holding on randomly. He was targeting specific nerve clusters, using knowledge passed down through generations of hunters. The crystalline armor that had seemed so invincible was designed to stop energy weapons and crushing attacks, not the precise, penetrating bite of a creature that had evolved to kill things much larger than itself. Warlord Thexkar watched in growing horror as his supposedly invincible champion began to weaken. The battle serpent had never faced an opponent like Tank before. Every other challenger had tried to match the serpent's strength with strength, its speed with speed. But Tank was not trying to be stronger or faster. He was simply being what millions of years of evolution had made him, the perfect small predator. The serpent made one last desperate attempt to dislodge its attacker, rearing up on its tail and trying to crash down on Tank. But Tank rode the movement like a rodeo rider, shifting his weight and grip to stay exactly where he needed to be. When the serpent hit the ground, something in its struggle changed. The wild thrashing became weaker, more sluggish. Its toxic breath came in shorter gasps, and its neural disruptors stopped firing altogether. From the viewing area, Warlord Thexakar's voice cut through the silence. "This cannot be happening. My battle serpent has conquered 17 worlds. It cannot be defeated by such a small creature." But Tank was not just any small creature. He was the product of human ingenuity and the raw survival instincts of Earth's most determined predators. Every modification in his genetic code had been chosen for one purpose: to create the perfect partner for humans exploring a dangerous galaxy. The serpent's movements grew weaker and weaker until finally it collapsed to the arena floor, its great head resting on the deck plating. Tank maintained his grip for several more seconds, making sure the fight was truly over, then released his hold and stepped back. The arena fell completely silent. The battle serpent, the creature that had terrorized 17 worlds, lay defeated on the deck. It was still breathing, still alive, but clearly unable to continue the fight. Tank sat down and looked up at Sarah, his tail wagging slightly. Around his muzzle, crystalline scales glittered where they had been torn loose from the serpent's armor. He had done what she had asked him to do, and now he waited for her approval. Sarah smiled and gave him a thumbs up. Tank had not just won a fight. He had shown the entire Galactic Council what it meant to be human, to face impossible odds with a loyal partner at your side. In the viewing area, delegates sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The age of the battle serpent was over, and something new was beginning. The silence in the arena stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Every delegate in the viewing area stared down at the impossible scene below. The mighty battle serpent lying defeated while a creature barely 1/10 its size sat calmly nearby, waiting for his partner's approval. Ambassador Kethaval was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. How is this possible?" Sarah stepped forward, moving closer to where Tank sat. As she approached, the honey Wolverine stood and walked to her side, taking his usual position at her left shoulder. There was no dramatic celebration, no victory dance. Tank simply returned to where he belonged, as if defeating legendary monsters was just part of his daily routine. "You want to know how this is possible?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying clearly across the silent arena. "It is because you do not understand what Tank really is. You see a small animal and think he must be weak. But Tank is not just an animal. He is my partner." She knelt down and scratched behind Tank's ears, and the honey Wolverine leaned into her touch with obvious affection. Several delegates in the viewing area shifted uncomfortably at the display of genuine bond between the two. "For thousands of years, my species has worked alongside creatures that could easily kill us," Sarah continued. "We took wolves and made them into dogs. We took wild cats and convinced them to live in our homes. We took hawks and eagles and taught them to hunt with us instead of hunting us." Admiral Corex leaned forward in his seat. "But surely those were different circumstances. Those creatures were domesticated, made dependent on humans for survival." Sarah shook her head. "No, Admiral. That is where you are wrong. Domestication is not about making something weak or dependent. It is about partnership. It is about finding ways for two different species to work together, each contributing their own strengths." She gestured toward the fallen battle serpent, which was slowly beginning to stir. "Your warlord there has a pet. A very dangerous, very powerful pet, but still just a pet. It obeys him because it has been trained to obey, programmed to follow commands, but there is no real bond between them, no understanding. Tank looked up at Sarah and made a soft rumbling sound. She smiled and rubbed his head. Tank and I have been through 7 years together. We have explored dead worlds where the air would kill most species. We have faced down creatures that make your battle serpent look like a house cat. We have survived because we do not just work together, we think together. The delegates were beginning to understand, but Sarah could see the confusion in their alien faces. Species that had evolved as solitary hunters or rigid pack hierarchies had trouble grasping the concept of true partnership between different species. "Let me explain it differently," Sarah said. "When Tank was fighting your serpent, I did not give him any commands. I did not tell him what to do or how to do it. He made his own tactical decisions based on 7 years of shared experience. He knew I trusted him to handle the situation, and I knew he would find a way to win." She paused and looked directly at Warlord Thexkar, who was staring down at his defeated champion with an expression of complete bewilderment. "That is the difference between a weapon and a partner, Warlord. Your battle serpent is powerful, but it can only do what it has been programmed to do. Tank can adapt, improvise, and solve problems in ways no one could have predicted." The battle serpent was struggling to lift its head now, clearly disoriented but not seriously injured. Tank watched it carefully, ready to act again if needed, but showing no aggression toward a defeated opponent. "More importantly," Sarah continued, "Tank chose to fight for me, not because he was forced to, not because he was programmed to, but because after 7 years together we are family. He would face any danger to protect me, just as I would face any danger to protect him." This statement caused a stir among the delegates. Many species understood family bonds within their own kind, but the idea of such bonds forming between completely different species was almost unthinkable. Dr. Vexhai of the Altarian Science Consortium stood up in the viewing area. "Ambassador Chen, are you suggesting that this creature actually cares about your welfare?" "That it has emotions comparable to sentient beings." Sarah looked down at Tank, who was now watching the recovering serpent with alert but calm eyes. "Tank is not sentient in the way we define it. He cannot discuss philosophy or solve mathematical equations, but he is intelligent, he is loyal, and yes, he cares about me in his own way." She stood up and faced the viewing area directly. "That is what you do not understand about humans. We did not conquer our world by being the biggest or the strongest or the most dangerous. We survived by making friends with the creatures that were bigger and stronger and more dangerous than us." The implications of this statement began to sink in among the delegates. If humans could form working partnerships with their planet's apex predators, what did that mean for their relationships with other species? What did it mean for the balance of power in the galaxy? Warlord Thexkar finally climbed down from the viewing area and entered the arena. His battle serpent had managed to raise its head and was looking around in confusion, clearly unsure of what had happened to it. "This changes nothing," Thexkar declared, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "One victory does not make your species strong. The Vorthak Empire still controls 17 worlds." Sarah smiled, and something in that expression made several delegates take a step back. It was not a cruel smile or a threatening one, but it carried implications that made the watching aliens very uncomfortable. "Warlord," she said quietly, "you are missing the point. This was not about proving that humans are strong. This was about showing you that strength is not the only thing that matters." Tank made a soft chuffing sound and moved closer to Sarah's side. The gesture was subtle, but every predatory species in the viewing area recognized it as a protective response. Tank was not threatening anyone, but he was making it clear that he was ready to defend his partner if needed. "The galaxy is full of strong species," Sarah continued. "Species with natural armor, species with built-in weapons, species that can survive in environments that would kill most others. But humans have something different. We have the ability to make allies out of enemies, partners out of predators." She looked around the viewing area, meeting the eyes of delegates from dozens of different worlds. "We have been members of the Galactic Council for 5 years now. In that time, how many conflicts have we started? How many worlds have we conquered?" The answer was 0, and everyone knew it. Humans had been remarkably peaceful members of galactic society, focusing on exploration and diplomacy rather than expansion and conquest. "But that does not mean we are weak," Sarah added. "It means we choose our battles carefully, and when we do fight, we fight to protect the things we care about." Tank looked up at her and made another soft sound. Sarah knelt down and scratched his ears again, and the honey Wolverine's tail wagged happily. The delegates watched this simple display of affection and began to understand something that would change their perception of humanity forever. They were not just looking at a diplomatic team or even a warrior and her weapon. They were looking at a family, a bond that transcended species and went deeper than any treaty or alliance. As word of this battle spread throughout the galaxy, the phrase "as loyal as a human's companion" would become legendary. But more than that, it would become a warning to anyone who thought they could predict what humans would do or how they would react when the things they cared about were threatened. The arena barriers deactivated with a soft hum, but nobody moved for several long moments. The battle serpent had finally managed to coil itself into a defensive position, though it was clearly still weak and disoriented from its defeat. Tank sat calmly beside Sarah, occasionally glancing at the larger creature but showing no sign of aggression toward a defeated opponent. Warlord Thexakar approached his champion slowly, and for the first time since entering the chamber he looked uncertain. The battle serpent had been more than just a weapon to him. It had been proof of Vorthak's superiority, evidence that strength was the only thing that mattered in the universe. Now that certainty was shattered. "I do not understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My champion was perfect. Bred for war, trained for victory, armed with the most advanced biotechnology in the galaxy. How could it lose to such a primitive creature?" Sarah walked over to where the battle serpent lay coiled. Tank followed at her side, alert but calm. The serpent's eyes tracked their movement, but it made no aggressive moves. Up close, Sarah could see that Tank's attack had been precisely calculated. The honey Wolverine had targeted nerve clusters and pressure points, causing paralysis and disorientation without permanent damage. "Your serpent is not dead, Warlord," Sarah said gently. "Tank could have killed it, but he chose not to. That is another difference between a weapon and a partner. Tank understands the difference between winning and destroying." She knelt down near the serpent's massive head, close enough that the creature could have struck her if it chose to. But something in her calm demeanor seemed to communicate non-aggression, and the battle serpent simply watched her with its 6 glowing eyes. "Your champion is magnificent," Sarah continued, addressing both the warlord and the watching delegates. "Powerful, intelligent, beautifully adapted for combat. But it has never learned to think for itself, to make decisions based on changing circumstances. It knows how to follow orders and execute programs, but it does not know how to adapt." Tank moved closer to the serpent and several delegates gasped in fear. But instead of attacking, Tank simply sat down within striking distance of the larger creature and began cleaning his paws with obvious indifference to any threat. The message was clear. The fight was over, and Tank considered the serpent no longer dangerous. More importantly, he was demonstrating the kind of confident assessment of risk that came from intelligence rather than programming. "My species has a saying," Sarah said, standing up and addressing the entire gathering. "It is better to have a friend than to be the strongest person in the room. Tank and I are not the most powerful team in the galaxy, but we are effective because we trust each other completely." Admiral Korex finally found his voice. "Ambassador Chen, what happens now? The Vorthak Empire still controls 17 worlds. This victory, impressive as it is, does not change the military reality." Sarah smiled, and this time her expression was purely peaceful. "Admiral, I think you are still missing the point. This was never about military conquest. This was about understanding." She gestured toward Warlord Thexkar, who was staring at his defeated champion with an expression of complete confusion. The warlord came here believing that strength was the only thing that mattered. He thought that because he had the most powerful weapon, he could take whatever he wanted. But now he has seen that there are different kinds of strength. Tank finished cleaning his paws and looked up at Sarah expectantly. She reached into her diplomatic pouch and pulled out a small treat, which Tank accepted with dignified pleasure. The simple exchange drew amused sounds from several delegates, but also thoughtful ones. "You see," Sarah said, "partnership is not about dominance or submission. It is about mutual benefit, mutual respect, mutual care. Tank protects me and I care for him. We both benefit from the relationship." She turned to face Warlord Thexakar directly. "Your empire is built on conquest and fear. You take what you want because you are strong enough to take it. But what happens when you encounter something stronger? What happens when your weapons are not enough?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Thexkar looked from his defeated serpent to the small human woman and her companion, clearly struggling to process what had just happened. I do not know," he admitted finally. "Then let me show you," Sarah said. "Tank, help!" Tank stood up and walked over to the battle serpent. The larger creature tensed, expecting another attack, but Tank simply began examining the points where his teeth had penetrated the crystalline armor. His movements were gentle, almost clinical, as he assessed the damage he had caused. Sarah joined him, pulling a small medical scanner from her kit. Your serpent has some nerve damage and bruising, but nothing permanent. Tank was very careful to avoid anything that could not heal. She began running the scanner over the injured areas, while Tank watched attentively. The battle serpent seemed confused by this behavior, clearly not understanding why its former opponents were now trying to help it. This is what partnership looks like, Sarah explained to the watching delegates. When the fight is over, you help your opponent recover. You do not destroy what you do not have to destroy. You find ways to coexist. Warlord Thexkar moved closer, his massive form looming over the humans. You would help my champion? After it tried to kill your companion? Of course, Sarah replied without looking up from her scanner. Tank and your serpent were doing what they were supposed to do. They fought with honor and skill. Now that the fight is over, there is no reason for hostility. Tank made a soft rumbling sound and gently touched one of the serpent's scales with his nose. The gesture seemed to communicate something, because the serpent's tension visibly decreased. Dr. Vexhai leaned forward in his seat. Fascinating. It appears the creatures are establishing a dominance hierarchy. The serpent is acknowledging the honey Wolverine's victory. Sarah shook her head. Not dominance, Doctor. Respect. Tank is showing the serpent that he bears no ill will now that the contest is over. In return, the serpent is showing that it understands the fight is finished. She stood up and handed the medical scanner to Warlord Thexkar. Your champion will recover completely within a few days. The nerve damage will heal, and the armor will regrow stronger than before. If anything, this experience will make your serpent more effective in future battles. Thexkar stared at the scanner, then at Sarah, then at Tank, who was now sitting peacefully beside his former opponent. Why help us after we threatened your council? Because that is what civilized beings do, Sarah replied simply. We fight when we have to, but we also know when to stop fighting. We know the difference between an enemy and someone who simply disagrees with us. The implications of this philosophy began to ripple through the gathered delegates. If humans could treat even their defeated enemies with compassion and respect, what did that mean for future conflicts? What did it mean for the way galactic politics had always been conducted? Ambassador Kethval stood up slowly. Ambassador Chen, are you suggesting that the Vorthak Empire could become an ally? Sarah looked at Warlord Thexkar, who was still staring at the medical scanner in his claws. I am suggesting that everyone deserves a chance to choose a different path. Strength is useful, but it is not the only thing that matters. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose cooperation over conquest. Tank made another soft sound and moved back to Sarah's side, his duty complete. The battle serpent watched him go with what might have been respect in its alien eyes. As they prepared to leave the arena, Sarah turned back to address the entire gathering one more time. The galaxy is vast and full of wonders. There is room for all of us to find what we need without taking it from others. Humans learned this lesson long ago, when we realized that our world was big enough for both predators and prey, hunters and farmers, wolves and shepherds. She scratched Tank behind the ears, and the honey Wolverine's tail wagged happily. All it takes is the wisdom to know when to fight and when to make friends. As word of this encounter spread throughout the galaxy, it would mark the beginning of a new era. The age of conquest through pure strength was ending, replaced by something more complex and more hopeful. The phrase human diplomacy would become synonymous with finding unexpected solutions to impossible problems. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, other species would begin to wonder what it would be like to have a partner who would face any danger for them, just as they would face any danger in return. The galaxy was about to discover that the strongest bonds were not chains of dominance, but connections of mutual choice and respect. Tank looked up at Sarah and made his happy rumbling sound. They had work to do, new friends to make, and a universe full of possibilities to explore together.